Hello. At this station, we're going to test how clean the water of Terrell Creek is for the salmon species that are living there. We do this by looking at the macroinvertebrates that live in Terrell Creek. Now, you may remember from the introductory visit and the salmon trivia what macroinvertebrate means, but let's go over it again. Macro is the opposite of micro. Micro is something that you would need to use a microscope to see. So these animals are big enough to see with our eyes. Vertebrate, you might be able to feel. If you lean your head forward and feel the bumps on the lower part of your neck, those are your vertebrae. Invertebrates are organisms that do not have those backbones. So we are looking at macroinvertebrates, animals with no backbones that are big enough to see with our eyes. Macroinvertebrates are important for salmon because they are a food source for the juvenile or the fry stage of the salmon. They also help us to tell how clean the water is based on the amount of pollution that they can handle in these creeks. We collected some macroinvertebrates from Terrell Creek using this net. You might be able to see a shape here, the letter D. Using a D net, we captured some macroinvertebrates. We did this with a special technique called the salmon dance. With a net downstream, I carefully stepped in front and swished my feet around like a salmon swishing around in the water. This knocked macroinvertebrates into the current, which were then swept into the net without harming them. Now that we have our sample, we can try to catch some of these macroinvertebrates. We're going to use some tools. We have a box here, which is what we're going to hold them in. And then we have our super scientific scooper, which is otherwise known as a spoon. To start, I'm going to take some water in here and try to catch. Ooh, this one's a bright one. There's one. Our first macroinvertebrate. Now we can identify it. This tool here is called a dichotomous key, and it's a way of narrowing down the macroinvertebrate that we caught so we can identify it by asking questions. For example, looking at our macroinvertebrate, does it have a shell or does it have no shell? To me, it looks like it has no shell, so we can cross these animals off and move over to this section. Next, we're asking if it has legs or if it has no legs. And looking at our macroinvertebrate, I don't see any legs, so we'll move over to this side. Next, we'll see if it has tentacles, if it is worm-like, or if it is microscopic. And we already know that we're looking at macroinvertebrates, so we know it's not microscopic. And I don't see any tentacles on it. So we're looking at this group of macroinvertebrates here. Now we'll try to match the shape and the colors with the description that you see here. So it looks pretty skinny. It has segments on it. And it doesn't have a lot of hairs. This one says it's red as well. So I think that we have identified our first macroinvertebrate as a midge larva. We'll set this one to the side. And we'll see if we can catch our next one. Wow, that one's really fast. This one also looks like it swims on its side. For the next one, we'll use this chart. This one breaks these macroinvertebrates into different groups. So here we have worm-like, we have beetle-like, and we have crab-like. And looking at this one, it definitely doesn't look like a worm. It doesn't really look like one of these beetles. It looks more like one of these crustaceans or crabs. And if we look at our macroinvertebrate here, we can match it up with which one it looks like best, which to me, it looks like we have a scud or an amphipod. So there's two. We'll catch one more. That was a little easier. And again, if we look at our macroinvertebrate here, it doesn't look like a worm. It has a lot of legs. It doesn't look like a beetle. We're looking again at crustaceans or crab-like. And this one is close to the amphipod. This one looks like the aquatic isopod. Now that we've caught and identified some macroinvertebrates, let's see how they can tell us how clean the water is. Each of these macroinvertebrates can tolerate a certain amount of pollution. Can you think of some examples of pollution that might get into Terrell Creek? You may have thought of trash or litter, oil from cars, or even dog poop. These macroinvertebrates that we caught can be separated into groups based on the amount of pollution they can tolerate. Group 1 macroinvertebrates cannot tolerate pollution. Group 2 macroinvertebrates can tolerate some pollution, and Group 3 macroinvertebrates can tolerate higher pollution levels. Let's look back at the macroinvertebrates that we caught and see which of these three groups they're a part of. The first one we caught was a midge larva, and a midge larva fits in Group 3. The second one we caught was an amphipod, which is a Group 2 macroinvertebrate. And finally, the third one was related to an amphipod. It doesn't show up on our index here, but an isopod, and is also in Group 2. So our results show us that we have 0 macroinvertebrates in Group 1, 2 macroinvertebrates in Group 2, and 1 macroinvertebrate in Group 3. Based on these results, do you think that Terrell Creek is excellent, fair, or poor for salmon? Take some time to come up with your conclusion. I think overall, Terrell Creek is fair for salmon because we didn't catch any macroinvertebrates in Group 1, and we caught most of our macroinvertebrates from Group 2, which means it's not quite excellent, but it's not bad. So we would call that a fair rating for Terrell Creek. Thanks for joining me at the Macroinvertebrate Station.